The Lord be with you. I'm Todd Townsend, Bishop of Huron. After 2 weeks of focus on these Genesis stories through the lens of women, the matriarchs of the stories, these last 2 videos in the series will focus on the remaining patriarchs. If you look at how Genesis is organized, you can basically divide the book into 4 parts. The whole thing's about God, of course. God is the central character in every part of the story and in ours. God is relating to creation and to people, families of people, who are trying to respond to God's summons, God's invitation, God's call to live in a living relationship with God. The first of the 4 is Adam. This is in the prehistory. He's the first human, the first place, Eden, the first creation. The second part of the story is Abraham, along with Sarah, who embraces the call. Third part revolves around Jacob, which we'll hear today. This is Rebekah and Isaac's son, and Abraham and Sarah's grandson. We'll see how Jacob reveals that it is a very conflicted call of God. And then the book concludes with Joseph, the young son of Jacob, who lives out the hidden call of God. The invitation to be in relationship with God is embraced, then it's conflicted, and it's always somewhat hidden until revealed. Jacob. As we've seen, there were plenty of conflict between the humans before Jacob came along, but here it gains some focus and takes it up a level in this remarkable and infuriating character. The thing that we notice about our heroic ancestors in the faith is that there's no hiding their faults, their failures, their earthiness. Jacob again stands out in this regard because his behavior is scandalous in so many ways. The grandson of the promise is this crude mixture of motives. He's a rascal compared to the faithful grandfather Abraham or his successful father Isaac. And here we see how the purposes of God are tangled up in self-interested behavior even. Yet God has chosen Jacob to be a special part of the plan. This child who could be considered low and despised will be overturned through conflict and trouble, and God's purposes will get worked out in and through the trouble. This is a blessing and a burden of life with God. So the Jacob story is told in chapters 25 to 36, and there's a lot to it. He then continues to be a central part of the Joseph story, chapters 37 to 50, which covers the whole second half of Genesis. I won't be able to summarize it all here, but it's pretty good reading though, so I suggest you read it again or for the first time. Here are the contours of the story, things to watch while you're reading. God has made a promise to form a people, a family, to be God's people. And God has promised to be their God. God has promised protection, reward, heirs, a great nation, a people who will be blessed so that they may become a blessing to others. God promises that faithfulness is the goal and summit of the relationship in this everlasting covenant. But as the story progresses, it's far from clear if or how God's going to be able to keep the promise. And will the humans trust in this promise and blessing enough? We've seen all along how the promise comes up against one kind of barrenness or resistance or another, one kind of conflict or another. Nothing's particularly easy. And for Jacob, right from the womb, he's jostling and agitating as he grows. It's clear that he cares primarily about his own prosperity, his own well-being and fertility. He steals the blessing from his father and his brother. He manipulates the situation in one scene after another to meet his own needs and interests. First, it was with Esau, his brother. When Jacob steals his brother's birthright, Esau vows to kill him, so Jacob runs. And this broken relationship hangs over Jacob's head for much of his life. Jacob runs away, he leaves Beersheba in the south and goes toward Haran, far in the north. And he stopped one night, laid a stone under his head for a pillow, and had that wonderful but strange dream of the ramp or the stairway, the ladder to heaven, with the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside Jacob and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. And the promise is both renewed and given explicitly to Jacob. And Jacob wakes up shouting, how awesome is this place? God is in this place and I didn't even know it. This is the house of God, Bethel. This is the gate of heaven. Pretty powerful dream. He set a stone pillar up on the to mark the spot, and he said, "This will be my God." And from there, Jacob continued far north and east around the great desert, and he met some people at a water well, one of whom was Rachel. The whole point of this journey was to run away from Esau's threat and to start a new life with his uncle Laban. Jacob was looking for Laban, but he found first Rachel and fell in love immediately. And he kisses Rachel. It must have been a heck of a kiss because it caused him to weep aloud. And Jacob settled there, working for Laban, in love with Jacob. For 7 years he worked so that he could marry Laban's daughter. And the trickster got tricked, because when the time came, Laban offered his older daughter, Leah, instead. But Jacob loved Rachel, so he worked another 7 years to earn Rachel's hand, and everything in the story is a bit of a chess match. Jacob ends up with 4 wives in total, Rachel being the favorite, and 12 sons. These sons became the namesake of the 12 tribes of Israel. You may have heard of them. Leah gave birth to 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Rachel, who remained barren, got her servant involved, Bilhah, and there were more sons. Bilhah gave birth to Dan and Naphtali. Leah joined in again, giving her servant Zilpah a shot at it in marriage, so that Leah could raise more children through her, and Zilpah gave birth to Gad and Asher. Afterwards, Leah became fertile again and gave birth to Yishachar, Zebulun, and Dinah, Jacob's first and only daughter. And then finally God remembered Rachel, who gave birth to Joseph and Benjamin. Okay, you got that? These 12 sons and daughters maybe, are part of the promise of God. The promise was kept. These sons will return next week in the story of conflict that's coming up in Joseph's story. So after Joseph was born, Jacob decided he could go back to his parents and his brothers, seeking maybe reconciliation. And with Rachel's help, Jacob had to trick Laban in order to be released. Of course, there was a trick, but it worked. And off he went with Laban chasing after him, wanting to kill him. And as Jacob neared his homeland, he sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau, who he had wronged so long ago. And they returned with news that Esau was coming to meet Jacob with an army of 400 men. So Jacob prepared for the worst. He prayed to God, and he sent on ahead of him a tribute of flocks and herds to Esau, a present to my master Esau from your servant Jacob. Jacob moved his large family and flocks across the river, and he returned to be alone overnight before this confrontation. And there a mysterious being appeared in the night, and the two wrestled until daybreak. And when the being saw that he did not overpower Jacob, he touched Jacob on the hip and gave him a limp. And Jacob demanded a blessing of this person and wanted to know his name but didn't get it. But he instead was named Israel, the one who struggled with the divine one, the one who prevailed, the one who has seen God. Jacob asked this being's name again, but refused to answer. And he ended up calling the place Penuel, meaning face of God. I have seen the face of God and lived. And it says, finally in the morning, Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming with his 400 men. He divided the children between Leah and Rachel and the 2 maidservants, and he put the maidservants out in front, Leah and the children next, Rachel and Joseph last. And then Jacob led the way as he approached his brother. He bowed down 7 times, honoring his brother. But Esau ran up and embraced him, held him tight and kissed him, and they both wept. Then Esau looked around and saw the women and children. And who are these with you? Jacob said, the children that God saw fit to bless me with. Then the servants came up with their children and bowed, and Leah and her children also bowed. And finally Joseph and Rachel came up and bowed to Esau. Esau then asked, and what was the meaning of all those herds and gifts that I met? What? I was hoping that they would pave the way for my master to welcome me, says Jacob. And Esau said, Oh, brother, I have plenty of everything. Keep what is yours for yourself. Jacob says, Please, if you can find it in your heart to welcome me, accept these gifts. When I saw your face, it was as the face of God smiling on me. Accept these gifts I have brought for you. God has been good to me, and I have more than enough. And Esau accepted. And then Esau said, Let's start out on our way. I'll take the lead. It's beautiful. In all this, we see the capacity of God to transform people, to transform power relations, and to bring a well-being that's far better than the one that we can provide for ourselves. Next week, we'll move on to that young son, Joseph. In the meantime, be at peace, stay safe, pray for one another as I'm praying for you.